Hello and welcome to Craftiosity, where creativity comes to you with monthly craft kits delivered to your door. This month, bring the scent of lavender to your cupboards, drawers or handles with this felted lavender bag project, needle felting and stitching your design onto tactile calico fabric. Inside your kit, you'll find your embroidery threads, 4 colours of felt roving, your sewing needle, your felting needles, a lavender pouch, embroidery hoop, stuffing, and your calico fabric. You'll also find your template for this design, step-by-step photo instructions, and a little something for your pinboard. Cut a strip from the short side of your fabric measuring approximately 5 cm wide. Then take the remaining fabric and cut it in half. Take these 2 pieces and fold the shorter edge up diagonally and cut off the excess fabric. This will give you 2 square pieces of fabric. Fold one of the square pieces of fabric into quarters. Make a small pencil mark at the point where the 2 folds meet. This is the centre of the fabric. Fold your paper design template into quarters, making a pencil mark at the point where the 2 folds meet. Place the opened out fabric piece on top, lining up the 2 pencil dots to centre your design. Trace lightly over the design with a pencil onto the fabric. If you're struggling to see the design, try holding it up against a bright window. Loosen the screw at the top of the embroidery hoop and separate the inner and outer hoops. Place the fabric on top of the inner hoop, positioning the design centrally in the hoop. Push the outer hoop down on top and tighten the screw. Cut a length of brown embroidery thread roughly 40 to 50 centimetres in length. Thread your needle with all 6 strands of the thread and tie a knot in the other end. We'll start by stitching the branches with berries and rounded leaves using the stem stitch. To do this, come up from the back of the fabric and make a small stitch along the main branch line. When you come up from the back for the next stitch, come up to the left of the first stitch just before the end of the stitch. Make another stitch as normal. Come up to the left of this next stitch just before the end of the stitch again, and repeat in this way until you've stitched the branch. Rethread your needle with 3 strands of brown thread and use a back stitch to stitch the smaller branches coming off the main branch. To do this, make your first small stitch as normal. When coming up for the second stitch, come up from the back of the fabric, leaving a stitch size space from the end of the first stitch. Then go down into the hole at the end of the first stitch. Repeat this along the line. For the branches with pointed leaves, rethread your needle with 6 strands of the thread again and use a split stitch to sew the main branch. Make a small stitch, then bring your needle up through your fabric, leaving a small gap, and come back towards the first stitch. Push your needle down through your fabric from front to back, going through the threads of your first stitch, splitting the threads as you push through. Repeat this for the following stitches. For the central branch of the pine sprigs coming off the main branch, use 3 strands of brown thread and stitch these in back stitch as you did before. Thread your needle with 6 strands of green embroidery thread and tie a knot in the end. Stitch pine sprigs using a simple straight stitch. For this stitch, come up from the back of the fabric at the start of the pine needle nearest to the branch and come down at the end of the pine needle line before moving on to the next one. Use 3 strands of green thread and a back stitch to stitch the little stems going into the berries. For the smaller rounded leaves, use 2 strands of green embroidery thread and stitch each outline using a single lazy daisy stitch. To do this, come up through the fabric at the pointed end of the leaf and create a loop with a thread that is bigger than your leaf. Then go back down through the same hole you came up through, but don't pull the thread through, leave the loop behind. Then come back up through the fabric just inside the top of the leaf on the inside of your loop of thread. Make a small stitch over the loop, going back down through the fabric just outside the top of the leaf, like this. Don't pull too tightly or your leaf will lose its shape. Fill in these leaf shapes with the lighter green roving. Tease out a small amount of the roving and lay it on top of the leaf area. Use your felting needle to stab through the roving and the fabric in the centre of the leaf several times. Hold your piece by the embroidery hoop and be careful with your hands, body and table as you do this. The needle is very sharp. Fold over any of the roving that is outside of the leaf using the felting needle and use it to fill in the leaf. If the roving is too wispy, you can twirl it around your needle. Repeat this until your leaf is filled in, then move on to the next leaf and fill in the same way. Use the same technique to fill in the larger pointed leaves with the darker green roving. Take a small piece and roll it in your fingers until it's about the size of a leaf. Then lay the roving on top of the leaf shape and felt it in the centre, then at the top and bottom point of the leaf. Then felt along the edges of the leaf, pushing the roving in with the felting needle so it stays within the outline. Don't worry if you can't follow the pencil line exactly, so long as the roving covers the pencil lines. To create the berries, pull a very small amount of the red roving and roll it roughly into a ball with your fingers. Place this ball onto the fabric where you want the berry to be and felt the ball in place. Take an even smaller piece of the pink roving and roughly roll it into a ball. Position on top of the berry off to the side and felt it in place to create a little highlight. Make mottled berries by blending some of the pink and red roving together. Take a small piece of the two roving colours and place on top of each other. Pull apart the roving and then place on top of each other again, repeating until the red and pink are completely blended like this. Take a small piece of this blended roving and use to felt some of the berries in the same way as before. Finally, felt the lettering of the word joy in the centre of the design, or you can choose your own word. Pull a piece of the red roving and stretch it out until it's thinner and longer. Twist the roving slightly and position at the start of the J so the roving overlaps the start of the letter slightly. Begin felting the roving in place, pulling it in with the tip of the felting needle to create a narrow line. Add more roving strips as needed, overlapping the start of one piece with the end of the previous piece. Take the 5 cm wide strip of fabric that you cut earlier and fold the rectangle in half along the width. Using a single strand of green thread, stitch your folded rectangle with a running stitch in and out of the fabric like this, leaving a gap of approximately 1 cm from the cut edges. Fasten off the thread with a knot at the end. Trim the seam of your rectangle down to about ½ cm. Turn the rectangle inside out so your stitches are on the inside, using a pencil to help push the fabric through. This will become your hanging loop. Take the undecorated square of fabric and mark the centre point using the folding technique as before. Use a ruler and pencil to mark 6.5 cm from the centre point up to the top, down to the bottom, and to the left and to the right. Then use these marks to draw a border all around the 4 sides with your pencil. This is what you will stitch along. Place your stitched square face up on the table. Then place your undecorated square on top with the drawn borders facing up. Fold your hanging loop piece in half and sandwich it upside down between the 2 squares in the centre of the top edge, like this. The hanging loop should be between the squares, not sticking out, and its cut ends should line up with the top edges of the two squares. Using a single strand of green thread, stitch the two squares of fabric together along the marked line with a running stitch, capturing the loop at the top. Don't stitch all the way around the squares. Leave a gap at the bottom roughly 5 to 6 centimeters wide to allow you to turn it through the right way. Fasten off your thread. Trim your seams down so there's only about half a centimetre of fabric remaining along each side, except for where you have left the gap at the bottom of your bag. Cut the corner of the seams diagonally, being careful not to cut through the stitches. Carefully turn your square through the right way. Use the end of a pair of rounded scissors or a pencil to push out the corners so they're nice and pointed. Take small amounts of stuffing and stuff your square, making sure you push it right into the corners. You can use the same pencil or round-ended scissors to help. Once the square is roughly halfway full, place a lavender sachet in the centre, then continue stuffing around it so the lavender pouch is surrounded. Thread your needle with a single strand of green embroidery thread, then tie a knot in the end. Find the unstitched gap at the bottom of your bag and make sure the seam is folded in line with the stitching on either side. Bring your threaded needle up from inside the bag at the start of the gap, passing it through the fabric so the knot is inside the bag. Bring your needle across to the opposite side of the gap and push the needle through the fabric, then come back up through the fabric about half a centimetre away. Go back to the opposite side of the gap again, push the needle through the fabric, and then come back up half a centimetre away again. Repeat this criss-cross stitching technique until you have sewn up the gap. Pull the thread tight to close the gap completely. Your stitches should be hidden inside the gap. Fasten off your thread, and well done, your felted lavender bag is complete. Thanks so much for watching. We hope that you've enjoyed this tutorial and we look forward to welcoming you to the next craft kit project next month.